Alright, hi guys, your boy is back, and I know it's been a long minute since my last video, which was all about PWS, the Private Watch Society. So before we get started with today's show, I wanted to provide a quick update and say thank you to everyone who has expressed interest and for your warm reception and for blowing up my inbox. My inbox went from this to this, but I love it, and I believe I've responded to all of your emails, and I will continue to do so. And thank you to everyone who has expressed interest in attending PWS as my guest. I have already randomly selected the winner and have contacted him. And his initials are PB, and he's coming all the way from Alaska. And PB, we all look forward to seeing you there, and we can guarantee you that the weather here in LA is a lot nicer than it is in Alaska. In fact, we have guests coming from everywhere: Alaska, New York, I think Seattle, Wisconsin. So all of you watch enthusiasts, thank you very much for making us feel welcome, and we look forward to seeing you there. The link to the registration site is in the description below. Now, on to today's show, where we're celebrating my anniversary and the watch that started it all. So today's show is a year on the wrist with my Grand Seiko SBGR097. This was the watch that started it all for what's on the wrist. It was my first video and my first unboxing, which was my Grand Seiko. And I wanted to talk about a year with my Grand Seiko, my experiences on it, my experiences with it, and what I liked about it and maybe don't like about it after having it for a full year. So when I decided that the Grand Seiko would be my next watch, it actually took me less time to decide on purchasing that than my other watches, because it usually takes me months to decide before finally pulling the trigger. But I'm also sure that because this was the last watch available at the store that I bought it from, that also helped expedite things and gave me the final push. I actually bought this watch from Arizona Fine Time, and it was a limited edition to 500 pieces. And like any watch, I've done my due diligence on Grand Seiko, and sure, I've heard or I've read all the sentiments that, oh, it's just a Seiko, or it's Toyota's Lexus, or Honda's Acura. Well, first of all, those statements are disrespectful, and secondly, there isn't anything wrong with those products. I mean, most Seikos are legit and will last us a lifetime, and can we think of a more reliable car than a Toyota or a Honda? So any upgrade to those lower end products should be a welcome thing. But I understand the comparison between a car and a watch, but it's a little bit different. To me, a car is more of a status symbol. It's something that we're judged on more than a watch. So when we pull up to work, if we pull up in a BMW or a Porsche or whatever, whatever it may be, the immediate judgment by someone who doesn't know us is, oh, he's pretty high up on the pecking order. But for a watch, it's different. A watch is a lot more personal. There is a sense of achievement with a watch that we're aware of, even if no one else is aware of. So to me, I don't look for the status symbol. I like the Grand Seiko because of that status symbol in my mind, because I know how great of a watch this is. And unless we're a total going around showing off our watch and saying, hi, how are you? No one is going to notice what's on our wrist the way that they might have noticed with our car. I mean, when we get to work, we park our car and we don't see it again for the next 8 or 9 hours. But with our watch, we have that on all day long. And that to me makes a difference, and it makes it more personal owning a watch than a car. So I've already had high expectations with this Grand Seiko, such as its legendary Zaratsu polishing technique, which results in that mirror-like polishing. And it did not disappoint, even though I had those high expectations. But is there something about the watch that was pleasantly surprising to me that I wasn't expecting? Yes, there is. And one of those things is the color of that dial. That blue is not a solid shade of blue. It changes under certain angles or certain lighting conditions. So it's a different looking watch than what it looked like at the start of the day than when we finished at the end of the day. That blue changes to different shades. It's almost like a blue, a gray, a dark gray, a charcoal gray, kind of a midnight blue. And that to me makes the watch look like a different watch each time. It makes it a lot easier to become less tiresome of that special blue. So I've talked a lot about the greatness of Grand Seiko, and deservingly so. But is there anything about this Grand Seiko that I could say could use some improvement? Should I even go there? Do it. So after having this watch for a full year, this is my take on what I think could use some improvement on the finishing of this Grand Seiko, which sounds nuts. But as great as the polishing is on my Grand Seiko, its brushed work is not on the level of other watches, such as the legendary AP Royal Oak or some of the Jean Richards. You can see those watches have such a really rich, such a deep brushed finishing on that those really stand out. So I wonder why, if the Grand Seiko can make such a great polishing finish that those other watches lack, why wouldn't they do a brushed finishing just as good as those watches? So that made me wonder, why, if Grand Seiko can make the best polishing in the watch business, why can't they make such a good brushed finishing to match those other watches? The only thing I can think of is those Grand Seiko watchmakers are so meticulous at what they do. I mean, they think about things that you and I can't possibly think of. So my theory as to why the brushed work is not on par with some of those other watches is because the polishing is so rich that maybe, just maybe, that brushed work would be too contrasting with the polishing, if that makes sense. So maybe they wanted to tone down their brushed work, because they can certainly make it as rich as like an Audemars Piguet Royal Oak, but they didn't. So it must be, in my mind, intentional. Which that would make sense if they don't want the two finishings to contrast so sharply. But for me, in my opinion, if I was given the choice, would I want my Grand Seiko's brushed work to be such as the AP's Royal Oak? Yes, I would. I wouldn't mind it, even if it's so contrasting, because a brushed finishing can look so amazing. And that's what I really like about the AP's finishing, is that brushed work, that legendary brushed work. So even though it might be really contrasting, I suppose I wouldn't mind it as much. So I can appreciate both the polishing and the brushed work. But Grand Seiko clearly made a decision for us to appreciate the polishing more than the brushed work. I just would like to have had the choice of experiencing both. So is there anything else about my Grand Seiko that I wouldn't mind having seen any changes to? Well, kinda sorta. And it involves the new rebranded Grand Seiko dial. A lot of us are aware that Seiko dropped the dual dial where it says Seiko and Grand Seiko in lieu of just Grand Seiko across the top. And there is some division on this. Some people don't like this, and some people have always dreamt of this, where the Seiko name is dropped in lieu of just Grand Seiko. So where do I stand on this? I like it. I like the new Grand Seiko branding across the top, because when I looked at my watch, I never looked at the Seiko name. I just looked where it said GS Grand Seiko, because it's the most elegant, beautiful font on any dial that I have ever seen. So I enjoy looking at that. So I don't mind where it's across the top, front and centered, where it commands the attention that it deserves. Excuse me. What? Excuse me, but I'm in the middle of a show here. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I was wondering, is it possible, just possible, that some people might get tired of or even lose their appreciation if Grand Seiko was the only name on the dial versus comparing it to Seiko and Grand Seiko? Oh, well, that's interesting. You could be right. I could be right. He could be right. Let me know what you guys think. Another concern with Grand Seiko is its resale value. We've all heard, oh, you're never going to get as much for it as you would a Rolex. Well, factually, okay, that's correct. I can't think of any other watch that holds its resale as a Rolex. But that's not necessarily fair to Grand Seiko, and it shouldn't deter anyone who is thinking about a Grand Seiko and is worried about its resale value. My Grand Seiko's retail value was in the $4,600 to $4,700 range, and I've received two separate offers, one for $4,000 and the other one for full price. So from my experience, its resale value is a non-factor. But mine is also a limited edition, so that's also something to take into account. So after a year on the wrist with my Grand Seiko, does that mean it's solidified as a keeper, or is there any other watch that I would be willing to swap this out for? So cards on the table? Well, I'm not ready to say that I'm willing to swap it out for, but there is one watch that has crossed my mind that's in the Grand Seiko's category, and that's Glashütte's Senator with the big date in the blue dial. And what attracted me to Glashütte's is that blue dial and that gorgeous blue leather alligator strap. But it's also a Glashütte, and I wouldn't mind owning a German watch. So that is a watch that I considered, well, a little bit more than briefly, from my Grand Seiko. But the reason I can't give it a resounding yes, I would swap it out for, is because that Glashütte is not available in a bracelet. It's only available in a leather strap. And as gorgeous as that alligator strap is, I always like to have options between a bracelet and a strap. But what if that Glashütte was also available with a bracelet? Would I swap out my Grand Seiko for it? Well, that's now we're talking a hypothetical within a hypothetical. And I won't go too far down that rabbit hole. I'll be creative enough to I wonder if it was a realistic scenario, but since that's not a realistic scenario, I can't provide a definitive yes. I also wouldn't know what that metal bracelet would look like on that Glashütte. So for the time being, my Grand Seiko reigns supreme as not another watch in its category that I would swap it out for. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you the next time. So when I got my Rolex XP, so the Rolex value, the value of the Rolex, the value. So in the long run, is it Grand Seiko or Grand Rolex? Is it Grand Seiko or Rolex? See ya.